I'm Emilie and I believe with my whole heart and soul that our homes are places where we can seek and love the truth, celebrate beauty, and learn good things every single day. That's why I'm educating my kids at home, and I know you can do it too. Welcome to Heart and Soul Homeschool. Well, you may know my guest today as America's Constitution coach, but he's also a lawyer, an entrepreneur, and a former state Texas representative. Rick Green, thanks so much for being with me today.
I feel like that was 3 strikes against me. Wait, lawyer, politician.
No.
I mean, this
well, you're right.
bad.
It doesn't sound good.
Listen to this guy.
It doesn't sound good, but I can vouch for him. He's a great guy, and you're going to love the conversation. So stay with us here, right? Stay with us. Well, before we dive into our topic today, I would love for you just to tell folks who may not know much about you, who you are and what you do.
Sure. Well, first of all, I was homeschooled myself. I actually did all of it, homeschool, private school, public school. I was homeschooled in the day where you didn't answer the front door. You know, it was touch and go for sure. So my mom always told people when they'd stop her and say, "What a sacrifice," she'd say, "No, it's an investment." So if I could start there and just say, anybody out there that has taken control of your child's education and you're making those tough decisions, God bless you. Thanks for the investment in the next generation. So that was my upbringing. And then, we homeschooled all 4 of our kids all the way through. Our oldest got his college degree in bachelor's in economics at 17 years old.
Wow.
While homeschooling with us and doing Liberty University online. And I'm not actually a big advocate of college anymore, but for those that go into particular fields, it makes sense. But most people, hey, man, get out in the real world, start doing some real things and getting your family started. Okay, enough of that. Anyway, so I became a legislator. Did that for a couple of terms, started working with David Barton and WallBuilders, been doing that for over 2 decades, and started Patriot Academy while I was in the legislature. And the whole idea is to give people a chance to learn how to be good citizens, learn how the system works, basically understand liberty and be good stewards of the liberty that we've been given. And so we do some really cool programs in state capitals around the country where we take over the Capitol and run everybody through a legislative simulation. We have a beautiful campus in Fredericksburg, Texas, where people can come be a legislator for a couple days. They can do a handgun defense class if they want to learn how to defend their family, Constitution crash training. And then we also have about 28,000 coaches, Constitution coaches around the nation that use our very fun and entertaining materials. I say that because history and government can be very boring, but we do everything we can to prevent that from happening. So anyway, we're having a great time as we've basically made saving the Republic our hobby.
Yeah, it's great. And I actually, don't want to brag, but I am one of those 28,000 Constitution coaches. And a couple of years ago, my husband and I led your Biblical Citizenship in Modern America class at our church. We had a great turnout. We had about 55 folks that joined us every week for it.
Good.
And it was just an awesome experience. We learned so much, but it was also really neat because it was such a great group of people who were invested not only in their faith, but also they loved our country and, cared about the future of our nation and kids and bringing them up to know our true history and how that relates to our faith and our walk with the Lord. And so it was just a really exciting time. And so I can personally tell you that if you don't know about these programs and what Patriot Academy does, I encourage you to check that out. And we'll be sure to link back to that in the show notes because you can't go wrong getting involved. And especially as homeschoolers, it's a wonderful resource for us as homeschoolers in the social studies and history. So much there to dive into.
Okay, wait, I got to do my survey questions.
Okay.
Can I do that real quick of you? So number 1, did you stay awake in the class?
Absolutely. I was riveted. Yes.
All right, good. So
yes.
it wasn't a sleeper. All right. And then on number 2, did you feel how do I describe it? The I'm not the only one kind of moment, right?
Yes.
When you look around the room and you got 55 people in there and they're, after the video, they're talking about this stuff. And did you ever have that kind of epiphany moment of, thank you, Lord? I like the Elijah moment of, I'm the only one, Lord. And he's like, 7,000. Did you get any of that during your 8-week course?
We did. And I can tell you that one of the best things from it is became such a tight group of people and we know who each other are now, right? We know that we're committed to the same values, the same things. And some of our we were relatively new to the church at time, and some of our closest friends are part of that group of people. It really created a lasting bond. And so again, I encourage everyone to check that out because you really can't go wrong. So So
That's
can we
awesome.
ask my
Love it.
questions now?
Thanks for letting me do my survey.
All right. Well, you talked about homeschooling your kids, and before we move on to our main topic, I want to talk to you just a little bit about that, because
Sure.
homeschooling is a lot of times a mom-dominated area. I think just because of the practicality, that it makes sense a lot of times for the mom to stay in the home and to school the kids while the dad works outside the home. But I'm always interested when I interview dads to ask them, what did your role as you homeschooled your kids look like? Because sometimes I think dads want to be involved, but they aren't sure exactly where they fit into that picture.
Yeah. Yeah, no, man, there's no question. My wife was 90% of it, no doubt, man. She chose the curriculum. I kind of weighed in on the history stuff just because that was my thing, but she chose the curriculum. She was the one day in and day out figuring out a way to make it work. We're very non-conventional and very terrible at schedules, our whole family. So our homeschooling schedule generally was, till 3 a.m. and sleep till noon, way too often. But we also spent a lot of our time on the road. So I was mainly the driver, I think you could say, not of the agenda. I was literally driving the bus. So we had a big old Eagle bus that we traveled the country in. I was speaking for David Barton at the time. And the cool thing about that is my kids got to actually see the battlefield, not just read about it, right? We got to go to the ballparks and the presidential museums and all that kind of stuff. So I was kind of the tour guide in the family, I guess you could say, because I love that kind of stuff. But I'm kind of a bad tour guide because I'm kind of a Chevy Chase type tour guide where you go to the Grand Canyon, you take the picture, you look real quick and say, okay, what's next? I want to go do something else. So I was really bad about cramming way too much into the schedule. And Kara was a master at being able to read the kids and know, okay, Pops, you've gone way too far. Let's just take the afternoon off and rest. So we found a great balance. We were really, really blessed. And I tell everybody, man, if you think for a minute that you can't pull off homeschooling, you're wrong. And if you think for a minute that you will not be so happy at the end of that journey that you made the decision to do it, I don't know how to get it across to people sometimes. It's just like, believe me, if you could get in a time machine and project yourself out 10 years from now or 20 years from now and be able to look at your children and feel the happiness and the joy that you had all of that extra time with them, even though you weren't perfect at, I don't know, physics or calculus or whatever it is that's scaring you to keep you from it. That is so unimportant. And there's so many experts and so many curriculums available to homeschoolers now to do all of that even better than certainly way better than the public school. But there's so many tools. But even beyond all that, the time shaping and molding the hearts and minds of your children, there's no substitute for it at all. Okay, that's my homeschooling commercial for the day.
No, I think it's great, and I appreciate the encouragement, because I think so many people are hesitant because of all those things that you just mentioned.
Yeah.
They think they can't do it, but really you can. And so I appreciate you saying that.
Yeah.
And you were kind of joking about being the real driver of things, but I think it's important to highlight that dads do provide the environment where homeschool moms can succeed a lot of the time. And so
right.
by getting the family out there on those vacations, on those trips to learn the history, you are kind of teeing your wife up to hit the home runs, maybe in the more serious and scheduled times. And so I think that dads are underappreciated a lot of times in homeschool. And so I appreciate you being willing to share the story and really challenging dads to get in there with you. So
yeah, amen.
It's a good thing.
Amen. You won't regret it. I'm telling you.
Nope, I think it's
you'll
true.
Love it.
And you have the fruit to prove it, right? Your kids are all grown and out of the house and living on their own successful life, thriving.
I have the best job on the planet now, Emily. I'm a grandpa. So
that's what I hear.
There's nothing better. I love being a dad. Don't get me wrong. I love being a dad. But grandpa, that is the best job on the planet. And the cool part is watching your kids do what you did with them, right? Seeing that generational passing of the torch. And of course, we know the Bible tells us no greater joy, right? And watching your kids, after being raised in the nurture and admonition of the Lord, live that out and now teach their kids that. Oh man, I'm so blessed. Blessed.
Yeah, that's encouraging. So now let's dive into our main topic. And it's kind of a sticky one. You and I were talking before we started recording. It raises some tensions, the issue of school choice, that is such a hot topic nationally. In all circles, really, we're hearing about it in public school, they don't like it. The teachers don't like it. You hear about it in the homeschooling world. A lot of homeschoolers don't like school choice. It's just a sticky one, isn't it?
Yeah.
But my husband and I have been talking about how it's really rare, and especially in the homeschool world, it's really rare to have a conversation that takes the big picture into account, like the overarching situation with education in America, and doesn't just focus on our little piece of it as homeschoolers. And so I heard you talking with your friends David Barton and Tim Barton the other day about kind of an overarching principle that's good for us to think about it as we ponder school choice. So could you kind of dive right into that?
Yeah, and if I can, I love to kind of lay some ground rules on a discussion like this right when I go in. One of those is I always go into any discussion that's potentially controversial with the attitude, if I'm wrong, I want to know, right? So like a lot of people go into a conversation like this and they're just like, I couldn't possibly be wrong. I've got this down. I've been doing this 30 years. I was wrong once or twice, right? Maybe a whole lot more than that. And so I want to know if I'm wrong. And I think that's actually the whole power of civil discourse and iron sharpening iron, is that we make each other better. We figure out, you know what? I assumed some things there. I need to correct my position, even if it's just a little bit. And sometimes it's a whole epiphany situation. There's some big policy issues that, not a lot, but there's a few where I totally flipped, like totally changed my position on it when I had new information or I saw evidence that completely changed my mind. So I just want to say that going in is that I think everybody listening, and as you and I have this conversation, we should always go into it saying, hey, if I'm wrong, I want to know. And we should all want that. And then the second kind of ground rule I always go in with is I'm a big Patrick Henry fan. He was one of the most important founding fathers. I would probably have been most like him out of all of them. Not necessarily the cerebral guy, but definitely willing to storm the hill. But he was a little bit of both. Anyway, he said in his Give Me Liberty or Give Me Death speech, he started with, according to the magnitude of the subject, ought to be the freedom of the debate. Only in this way can we arrive at the truth. And what he was saying is you got to have the willingness to hear other sides and talk about all of this stuff in order to find truth, because none of us are smart enough to have a lock on the truth. And so when we don't have debate, when we immediately say, oh, that's a bad idea, I'm not even talking about that. When we don't have debate, what that actually does is it locks in lies and it locks in the opposite of truth. And unfortunately, both sides end up sort of stuck in often the wrong information instead of finding that truth by having that iron sharpening together. So I just say all that so that maybe as your viewers and your listeners are listening to this, if they immediately go, as soon as we say school choice, I don't even want to know whatever side they're on. If they're not on my side, I'm not listening. Please don't do that. We need to be able to have civil discourse about every subject. And this one is, I would say, in Patrick Henry's words, according to the magnitude of the subject, ought to be the freedom of the debate. This is a huge subject because education determines the philosophy of government of the next generation. There's a quote attributed to Lincoln. I can't trace it for you, but it's attributed to him. The philosophy of the schoolroom in one generation will be the philosophy of the next. And we know that the left has taken over education in America. The poison of cultural Marxism was in the classroom for the last 30 or 40 years, and we now see it in our government. We see it in our churches. We see it in our entertainment. It's everywhere. So the magnitude of the subject is massive. It's literally the future of the country, and education is pivotal to that. In fact, I would argue civic ignorance, biblical ignorance, is the petri dish where bad government grows. And that's what we've been doing in the education system for the last 30 or 40 years. So it's a big subject. Let's have a huge freedom of debate as we go into it.
Yeah, I'm excited. And I failed to mention at the beginning, one thing that I wanted to set up is when you were a representative in the Texas legislature, you were talking about school choice before it was a thing. Most of us have started this conversation kind of since COVID happened. And when all of those things were exposed in our schools, which as terrible as COVID was, I think we can all agree that that's a positive thing, right? That it really laid bare all of this garbage really that is going on in the public school system in America. You know, the critical race theory, the gender theory, the poor academic situation that we're in, all of those things. But you were a school choice advocate way back when. And so maybe before we jump into that principle that I want you to talk about, talk to us about when that was and what was the conversation like back then?
Yeah, and I do think, by the way, COVID has been, if ever there was a all things work together for good for those that love the Lord and are called according to his purpose, this was it because
Yeah.
it was used to wake up a ton of people. Horrible things happened during COVID. I could spend all day on that one. But it woke up a ton of people because they saw what was happening in the classroom. Yeah, for me, man, I got elected in 1998 in the Texas legislature, and I had three big issues: school choice, ending property taxes, and vaccine choice for parents. And all of it always came back to who decides, who gets to make the decision. Is it the individual that's going to live with that decision, or is it some government bureaucrat or some other person in the community making the decision for that individual or that family or that business, that property owner, whatever it might be? So that always kind of drove everything that I did, and I think that really is the place to start, is that high level from a principled perspective. It always comes down to two words: who decides, whether it's a tax issue, an education issue, whatever it is, who decides. And so for education, for me, that just seemed natural to say the answer to the question who decides should be the parents. That's biblically who was put in charge for the education of a child, but also even just not even American culture wise, historically, the parent is in charge. That's the nature's way of doing things. The natural laws of nature and nature's God say the parent is in charge of that child's education. And every time we take the choice away from the parent and all of it's decided for the parent, in my opinion, it leads to a worse outcome, because never do you have a collective decision like that. I mean, a decision made for the masses by whoever that group is that's making those decisions. Never does it end up better. The economy always is worse. Without competition, you get fewer products, fewer choices, no customer service, no research and development. So anytime you take away that market-based, all these individuals are deciding what's best for them and creating that chaos of the market, Adam Smith's invisible hand. Anytime you take that away and you create a monopoly or you create a dictatorship or any level of control over who makes the decision, it's worse for everybody. And so that principle drove me in all of it: property rights, business, any kind of regulation from the government. It permeated everything. It was just a high level principle that I used to make all those decisions.
So fast forward, 20, 25 years now, and the discussion is happening everywhere. And as we record this episode, we're right in the middle of the state legislative seasons for the most part, most states right now. And so there are just constantly bills being put before legislators on this issue. And that's where things get sticky, right? So if we look
Yeah.
at it as that overarching principle, which is basically the free market economy at play,
Right.
and that we want parents to have the choice, when we look at these specific bills, that's where the rubber meets the road. And I think
Right.
that most homeschooling families agree that it should be the parents' choice to direct their education, and that is our responsibility. And I think we could even agree that most of these bills are well intended, right? That
Right.
the people who are putting them forward have great intentions, but sometimes there are little things in there that are hard
Right.
for us to agree with. And so help me unpack that, because that's
Yeah.
that's where it gets hard for me
Yeah.
as a homeschool mom.
Absolutely. So first, another overriding principle: never going to be a perfect bill. There's never going to be a perfect
Right.
system this side of heaven. Never a perfect piece of legislation. As a former legislator, I mean, I always had to sometimes hold my nose and vote for a bill that was 50% good, 50% bad, but it was the only way to get the good, and I had to deal with the bad later. So that definitely happens a lot.
Well, can
If you
we
have a perfect, go ahead.
Sorry to
Sorry.
interrupt you on that, but I think
Yeah.
that's something that we should maybe dive a little bit more into,
Sure.
because we make those kinds of decisions every single day, multiple times, right? Nothing in life is perfect. And so I
Right.
think where it gets hard is weighing out the bad versus the good. And so do you have sort of a system that you use in your own life when you look at this legislation? How do you decide when the
Yeah.
good outweighs the bad? What are you
Yeah.
willing to tolerate?
I think we've lost the art of the cost benefit analysis, right? The
Right.
ability to say, from an objective perspective. Here's the good, here's the bad. What outweighs? Is it worth the risk of doing something? We've fallen into this safetyism mentality where we don't take any risks at all. Right? We're just not. We're going to forego all good in order to not ever risk having any bad. And just stay back here and just deal with whatever the current situation is. And that to me is the opposite of the American spirit. I believe in the future belongs, as Reagan said, Ronald Reagan, the future belongs not to the faint-hearted, but to the brave. And that you have to have some level of risk in order to get any gain whatsoever. And so there's always a cost-benefit analysis. If you're in business, you risk capital and hours. You give up certain projects or products in order to focus on other ones. So there's always a give and take. When you choose a restaurant, you got to get, because I eat everything. I love all food. So if I choose to go eat Mexican food, I got to give up the Thai food or whatever for that meal. There's always a cost-benefit analysis. And even sometimes I'm going to spend a little bit more money, but this food is going to be better, or this car is going to be better. We've just kind of lost that ability to do that, and we've bought into this safetyism of not doing anything that has any risk whatsoever, and that will kill a culture big time. In fact, I would argue safetyism is why COVID became so bad. Everybody wanted to play it so incredibly safe. I think it's the reason that, the safetyism, I blame the Uvalde horrific tragedy on safetyism, where safety was more important than saving those children was saving the officers' lives. So we had people literally cower in the hallway with ballistic shields and bulletproof vests and 100 other officers instead of getting on the other side of that door and stopping the murder from taking place. So anyway, that's a whole other topic, but it does drive this very topic, this very issue of, okay, how do you decide this bill I'll take my chances on this part of the bill in order to get this other good stuff over here. And that is purely a cost-benefit analysis. So I always teach people at Patriot Academy to go through what we call the LIFT principles, and that's how you end up with your cost-benefit analysis. So it's limited government, individual liberties, free enterprise, timeless truth. And it's kind of the plumb line. So you measure everything against it, and then you decide, does the good outweigh the bad? Is it worth the risk of the bad in order to get the good? And those are pretty self-explanatory, but I'll give you 30 seconds on them real quick. Limited government means government should only do those things that we, the people, have empowered it to do. So we specifically say that in our constitutions. That's why we're not a republic. We're not a democracy. We're a constitutional republic. We limit our government to certain jurisdictions, and therefore, if it's outside those jurisdictions, government should not do it at all. So is it within limited government? Does it keep government in its proper place and make sure that the answer to the question who decides is the individual or the business or the pastor? And sometimes government should decide whether or not to go to war, whether or not to put the road here or build the road over here, that sort of thing should be their job. But does it respect limited government? Does it respect individual liberty? So is it protecting parental rights? Is it protecting your ability to make the decision on what you want to buy or not buy, that sort of thing? Free enterprise, obviously getting government out and letting the chaos of the market decide. And then timeless truths, that's sort of those laws of nature and nature's God and those basic principles. Again, parental rights kind of falls into all of these. So I would take each of those bills, and again, no perfect one. Some are better than others. Does it err on the side of freedom, or does it err on the side of tyranny? And does it let the parent decide? So if a parent, any school choice bill that puts the decision in the parent's hand, and as long as the parent can choose to opt in or opt out, you've got a lot of wiggle room for good or bad at that point, because then the parent, it's different for every parent. So if we truly believe the answer to who decides the upbringing of the child and the education of the child should be the parent, then not only should that parent get to decide for their child, we should also make sure that parent's not deciding for other children. So in other words, my friends, I have good friends on the other side of this issue that would vote no on any school choice issue, no matter how good or bad it is, because they're worried about the camel's nose under the tent. They're worried about future regulation and all that. I would say to them, that's great. For you, your answer would always be no. You're not ever going to take the money. You're never going to participate in school choice. But should you be deciding for me? Should you be deciding for that parent next door or that parent down the road, who for them, the cost benefit is different? They may not be wealthy enough to pay for property taxes and homeschool their kid or send their kid to a private school. Their only chance to get their kid out of that public school where they're fighting off guns and gangs and Marxism and transgenderism and all the leftism, their only chance may be this bill that you don't like. Great. You don't participate in the program, but should you be deciding for them? So that general idea of who gets to decide should make it easy for all of us to support the parent deciding, and then let the parent decide whether or not the cost benefit analysis pays off. And most of these bills start off, I think, pretty good, where they're basically saying, hey, mom and dad, you get to take 80% of the money. Maybe you don't get to take all of it, but you get to take 80% of the money and go put the kid wherever you want, and no strings attached. And everybody's always worried, but will they bring strings later? They might, but they could also bring those strings right now. The legislature could start regulating homeschooling, private schooling, all kinds of stuff even now. So there's always the risk that regulation will come. I like competition in school choice because what that does is it increases the pool of people that will be against regulation. So it actually helps to protect homeschooling and protect private schooling from regulation. If you got 100,000 homeschoolers in a big state like Texas, and you add 100,000 homeschoolers, you've increased your lobbying power at the state. If you add competition and now you had, say, 10,000 private schools in Texas, and now you got 30,000 private schools in Texas, your power in Austin at the legislature just went through the roof. So your ability to either stop regulation from ever happening, or if there is some now, to get rid of it, just went through the roof. So I see it as a long-term strategic way to reduce the public schools' power, reduce the teacher union power in lobbying, and increase the individual family's ability to make sure that the laws don't regulate them rather than regulate them. That was a super long, unfair, filibuster answer. I'm sorry. I should have given us more give and take on that.
No, I think that's great. And that last point that you just made is something that my husband and I talk about all the time. And he's going to be super jealous when he hears this podcast that he's not here to pick your brain even more about that, because I think our hearts, and just to let you know and the listeners know, I am very leery of government involvement in anything in my life.
Yeah.
Anything, including the homeschool, because
you should be.
As we should be, right? It's undeniable that really anything they touch doesn't usually get better. And so I don't think that those fears are unfounded. I think what bothers me about it, just as a mom, and I'm just being honest in the hopes that this conversation, that our listeners hearing it, that maybe it'll help everyone process this together. I hate to operate from a position of fear. I hate for any decision that I make to be because I'm fearful of what might happen if I don't do it. And so that's one of the things that kind of tugs at my heart as we talk about these school choice bills, because it kind of, I think a lot of times homeschoolers are kind of seen as the fly in the ointment, that we come out really strongly against school choice bills and kind of are seen to ruin it for everyone. And I hate that, because it causes so much tension between us and people who really have the same purpose in mind, who want to get their kids out of public school, whether they choose to homeschool or want to do a private Christian school, but we kind of just make it not able to happen for everyone. And so it's really interesting to hear you talk about how, well, maybe it protects us if there are more of us.
In fact, the way I like to say it, Emily, I like to say school choice empowers instead of cowers the homeschooling community, right? Like right now, we tend to have this mindset of almost cowering away from government or the process, or we don't want anybody coming close to us. Don't touch what we've got. This empowers us to protect what we have. It gives us more influence in the legislature, more power in our local communities, all of those things. It empowers instead of cowers, because I think you're right. We should never make our decisions from a position of fear, because honestly, anytime you do that, whether it's a virus and a quote unquote pandemic, or it's education, or it's taxes, or it's amendments to the Constitution, whatever it is, if your decision on your position is made out of fear, the logic part is shut out. That we just do that naturally. When we're in fear, we aren't good at reason and taking it through and doing a cost. I think that's why the cost benefit analysis got thrown out the door, because we were just on defense. We were just out of fear saying, leave me alone, don't let this happen. And so I think one thing to really remind everybody is, if you don't like the bill that's being passed in your state and you don't want to participate in school choice, fine, don't do it. But don't err on the side of tyranny. Err on the side of freedom. Err on the side of giving more people more choices, because the more competition, the better the overall system is going to get. And all I'm suggesting is that from a 30,000 feet view, that all of us should say, here's all the trillions, not even billions anymore, trillions of dollars between all the states and the local and the federal and everything, trillions of dollars that's being spent on education. And the leftists, not just liberals, I'm talking about people that hate America, hate God, want to turn your kids into trannies, all that stuff. The leftists control almost all of that money. And all we're saying is let's slice off a few, just a little bitty bit. Let's just slice off a little bit of that money and send that money to the parents and let the parents decide to move some of that money away from these leftist crazy people and move some of that money back to parents, churches, private schools, community groups, and organizations that actually want to reinforce what you're teaching at home and encourage what you're teaching at home instead of you're destroying it, which is what the schools are doing right now, undermining what pastors are saying, undermining what parents are saying. So man, let's just redirect some of that money and give competition a try. And you don't have to participate if you want to. You know what? Let the be kind of like, okay, I'll let them be the canary in the coal mine. I'll let them be the sacrificial lambs. I'm going to sit back and just watch and see how this works out. That's great. Just allow for, vote for, support the competition, even if you don't want to participate in it. That's what I'm asking people to do.
Which is a really interesting point. And so, I've got a question about it. So what
Sure.
I think when I hear people say that, is that even possible? So say all the other homeschool parents take the money and I don't. Is it possible for me to be in my own separate little category where they're not going to impose regulation on me? Honest question.
Yeah. So, okay, this is easier to answer in the private school world than the homeschool. So let me answer it in private school world, and then we'll go to homeschool. So in the private school world, think about it this way, and this is what the market does. This is what competition does. If a state currently doesn't have any competition at all, so no school choice at all, and all of a sudden they pass a bill and they say, okay, we're gonna allow parents to take part of the money and go to a private school. We know what'll happen. Some private schools will take the money and say we want to participate. Some private schools are going to say no, we don't want to risk having competition. That actually I don't want to risk having regulation. It actually creates more competition. Now you end up with public schools. You end up with private schools that take school vouchers and government money and private schools that don't. If the regulation becomes huge and overburdensome and those private schools start becoming more like public schools, then people will vote with their feet and with their money and start going to the private schools that didn't take any of the money. And the ones that did will either shrink or they'll fold into the public school. The market will eventually work that out. And I think you'll end up with all three. You're going to end up with private schools that are regulated, private schools that aren't, and then public schools that are still, bad, but they will get better because they'll see all this money leaving their school and they'll start pumping more money into the classrooms instead of administration. We know that happens. That's happened everywhere in the world that school choice and competition has happened. It's improved overall education for everybody. So a similar type thing will happen in the homeschool market, I believe, and that is if you take the money, you may have to do a standardized test every year, or you may have to, I don't even know what specific things they may try to throw out there. And so then each homeschool family gets to say, I'm not doing that. I'm not going to participate in that. We're going to keep doing our own thing, paddle in our own canoe, and we want nothing to do with the government or their regulation. And so it will be different depending on whether or not you want to take the money. Now, granted, some states don't have good homeschooling laws already, so they already require reporting to the state and doing things like that. And so that family or that state that family might have a different decision point, right? Their cost benefit is going to be a little bit different. Okay, we're not really having to add that much in terms of what we were doing with the state, and maybe we're not having to add anything, but we get an extra couple $1,000s to help pay for, well, frankly, most of us go homeschooled. That was the entire cost of a year. We don't need
Right.
10,000. We need give me $1,000 for each kid, man, and I can pay for this whole thing.
Right.
Yeah. So anyway, it's going to be a little chaotic. It's going to be just like the market in anything. And if you have the only hotel in the whole town, you don't want another hotel to open up because you don't want the competition. You're going to have to get better to draw. You might even end up losing somebody. That's why the public school system fights it. And frankly, sometimes that's a little bit why some private schools fight it. They're the only private school in town, and they're full as it is. They don't want any competition from additional private schools popping up. And there might be some in the homeschool, but I think most in the homeschool community, we just don't want to be messed with. We're the Leave Us Alone coalition. We don't want any risk of any government regulation. And so I understand that fear. Believe me. I mean, I get it. I'm just saying from an overall best for the country, which means best for you to have other people in your community that vote well and govern well. You want an overall rising tide to lift all boats. And if your state uses school choice to in any way regulate you in any way that you don't want, just say no. Don't participate. Just don't say no to other families being able to participate.
Yeah, so interesting. And this is a conversation, like I said, my husband and I just go around and around and around because we keep saying, well, what keeps them from regulating us with a stroke of a pen tomorrow, regardless?
That's right.
And so I do think that your advice of doing a cost benefit analysis for our families, right? Because I believe, and I know you believe, that God will give us the wisdom that we need for our families, not Emilie and Jared for Rick and Kara's family, and not Rick and Kara for Emilie and Jared's family, but each of us for our own family that we're entrusted with and will be held accountable for. And that within the Christian community, especially as we work these things out, is going to require a lot of grace on all of our parts toward each other as we make those decisions that may look different because our cost benefit analysis is different. One thing that I've heard you mention a little bit, and again, my husband and I talk about these things. We're nerds, and so we love to game all this out. But it seems like we have a lot of tools. When we look at the big picture of education in America, we have a sense of urgency that, man, if we don't right this ship, we can be doing all these other things. And if we're still churning out kids who are not good critical thinkers, who believe the wrong things, who are indoctrinated, it's going to be really difficult to turn things around. And so we feel a sense of urgency, like, let's get these kids out as quickly as possible into a better situation. There are a lot of tools that maybe we're not tapping into. What are some of those that homeschool families could really get behind and support? What's good legislation that we could put our oomph behind while also protecting, if we feel like we need to, our own personal safety, which we've just talked about we don't really necessarily want to focus on, but I think it's going to be an issue.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. When I say safetyism is bad, I absolutely, of course, I mean, I train thousands of people to defend their family physically. So I do want safety. Like I want protection of a family, and no doubt we have a responsibility to do that for our kids. I think it's interesting way you framed all of that, because for me, that sense of urgency has been there for 30 years. Everything you just described, that's exactly how I felt when I went into the legislature all those years ago.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's changed. And I think the urgent part is our own kids. You have so little time with your own kids. And I've just gotten to the point where I'm like, this is one area, and maybe I'm not very good at grace on this, is like, if you're still sending your kid to a public school where they're doing all this nonsense, I am praying for God to just shake you out of your slumber, because the urgency to get them out of there now before they are literally corrupted and just get them out now.
Yes.
The grace part, I totally agree with. On once you're now choosing, you may choose private school, or you may choose a homeschool co-op, and you may team up with some people, and you may take school choice vouchers or not take school. That's where I think you're absolutely right. We have to have grace in that, and saying it's everybody's cost benefit comes out a little bit different. I just don't see how your cost benefit for a public school comes out right now. So I sense your urgency right now. Absolutely. And culturally, I guess part of my reason I say it's so urgent for our own families is that culturally we've already lost that battle. We've already got 2 generations out there, and we see it in the types of protests that happen. The fact that you have kids siding with a terrorist group like Hamas, the fact that, all of that stuff is just evidence of we lost that battle with the masses. And so the sense of urgency I have is to raise up the remnant and essentially the Navy SEALs of civics, right? The ones that's the beauty of homeschooling and private schooling, is we're doing such a better job at educating our children. They're better debaters. They're better at just being well-rounded, of actually knowing what other religions and world religions are. All of that stuff, these kids getting educated in the homeschool and private school market, we win in 20 years, without doubt, if it's a fair debate, if you have actual debate. But the system is collapsing. It's absolutely collapsing around us. And so I think we have to seize this moment. School choice is taking off all over the nation right now because so many people have awakened to how bad the public schools are. And we need to be diligent. We need to be vigilant. We need to make sure that we're doing everything we can to we have to make sure that school choice does not allow the leftists to then take over private school and homeschoolers. I totally feel that desire and urgent need to do that as well. We just can't say that we can't let perfect be the enemy of good and say that because of that fear that could ever happen, we're not gonna allow competition at all. We have to walk and chew gum at the same time. And part of that comes from being in the legislature and realizing it's messy. There's no, I voted for parental notification when we didn't have a single pro-life bill in Texas. We had never passed a piece of pro-life legislation, and parental notification seems so incremental. Like that's literally the abortionist calling you to let you know that they're killing your grandkid. I mean, it's not even consent. It's parental notification, but it's all we could get. It was the most we had the votes for. And so we said, okay, let's take that little piece of incremental victory. And we got lambasted. I was called pro-abortion for actually voting for this bill that was the first step towards pro-life. And then we got parental consent. And then we got informed consent. And then we kept getting all these victories. And then a guy I recruited for the legislature 20 years ago passed a bill just last year to finally get rid of all abortion in Texas. Brian Hughes, great hero, wonderful senator now. I'm the only one we were college Republican buddies together. But it was 20-some years later from parental notification. So I say all that to say we're never going to get a perfect piece of legislation. We're not going to get the whole loaf all at once. This is a long-term battle. And frankly, this is my downer part, Emilie. We're going to experience some pain. The nation is going to go through. You can't avoid the consequences of bad decisions for decades and decades and decades, and pouring poison into the hearts and minds of our citizens for so long. There already is consequences for that. And what we have to do is say, we're the remnant. We know we're being faithful with what God's given us. We're doing everything we can to be offensive. We're going to be like Joshua and Caleb. We're going to take back ground. We're going to go into these cities and fortified cities where there's giants, all that kind of stuff. We're not going to give up on that stuff. We're going to be willing to fight for truth wherever we are, and we're going to have joy in our hearts while we do it. So that's kind of the part of again, back up, chunking up to the overall mindset of this whole thing and the attitude and the principles that we're fighting for.
Yeah, and I think we very much feel like we're raising warriors. We know the
Amen.
game. We know what they're up against. And we feel blessed that we're able to know that, because I was talking with some friends a couple of weeks ago, and they have kids who are older than ours. And all of this has come to light when they were pretty far down the road in the process. And my kids are 7 and 4. And so we're just really, really thankful and praise God that we're able to see as clearly as we can right now, based on what we know, what we need to prepare them for. And we know that it's not going to be easy. And along with that, I think my husband and I, our bottom line in all of this is that we have just committed to cheerlead anyone, any family in our church, any family that we come into contact with who is willing to, like you said, get their kids out of the public school and who wants to be involved in their education, to raise them in the faith, to disciple them, and to raise them to also be warriors alongside our kids. You know, we are raising kids who we hope there will be an army of the remnant that you're talking about that will be raised up to fight alongside them. We pray for that all the time. And I know you do too. And I
love that. Where do you live?
We live near Kansas City, Missouri. So,
Kansas City, Missouri. Okay.
Yep.
I remember you saying Missouri. I couldn't remember where. Yeah, I love what you just said. I got to tee off on this because building community is essential. We are not islands. We can't do this on our own. I don't recommend homeschool families just lock themselves in their room and never go out. You know, we interacted with people in our community. I coached Little League with my kids. We found other homeschool families and even created homeschool teams. All of that is so important. You need community. So build community because people are hungry, man. We've tripled in the last couple of years in homeschooling. I mean, it's growing like crazy. And your 7 and 4-year-old, you're raising men and women of Issachar that understand the times and know what to do. That's the warrior mentality that we got to have. Understanding what's going on, knowing what to do. And that only happens if we saturate ourselves in God's word and we build community, and then we go tend the garden wherever we've been planted. So we're with you. If you want to move to Fredericksburg, Texas, man, we're building a great community.
It's beautiful down there. Yeah, we love it. We love it down there. No, but what you just said, I appreciate that so much. And I think what I appreciate even more than your words today is that you spend your life creating resources for moms like me so that we can train our happy little warriors. And so as we close out here, I just want to say thank you for this honest discussion. It's been a treat for me to be able to be so honest and to get good feedback from you and to gain on your wisdom and your unique perspective. Tell us really quick before you go, where can people find you?
Sure. PatriotAcademy.com has it all our different courses and curriculum and programs and everything else. And I'll just leave your audience with this one thought. You may not like big gulps, and you may not think I should drink one and have all that sugar or whatever else it is, but you probably believe in enough freedom that you thought Michael Bloomberg was nuts when he went into New York and started outlawing big gulps, that was too much Coke for an individual to have. If that's how you felt about that, you should feel the same way about school choice. If you don't want to participate, don't. But if I want to drink the big gulp, let me drink the big gulp and live with the consequences of my decisions. That's what we call freedom. So please err on the side of freedom. And yes, please go to patriotacademy.com. We do a lot of fun stuff. And check out all you moms out there, check out Chasing American Legends. That's our kind of comedy reality show with Brad Stein, where we march with the Minutemen at Lexington. And my youngest son tries to break into the Declaration House where Jefferson wrote the Declaration. It's kind of fun and crazy, but it's a fun way for your kids to learn. They will fall in love with history, I promise you.
That's awesome. Well, you give me a lot to think about, and I'm sure the folks listening will have a lot to think about, and I'm grateful. So thank you, Rick, for joining me today, and for everyone else, I hope you'll join me next week for the next episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.
Heart and Soul Homeschool is a podcast presentation of the Herzog Foundation. The views and opinions expressed on the show are those of the host and guests and not necessarily the views of the Herzog Foundation. Be sure to like and subscribe to the show so you never miss an episode of Heart and Soul Homeschool.